The energy is good, Anthony. The energy is sweet.
Well, I feel like anytime you call me or I call you, it's always like yelling a name. It's like, Anthony. I'm like, Dave.
Can't get enough. I can't get enough of you, Anthony, dude. You're the spirit of Thunderbird right here.
Well, I think, and I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago, where we talked about like, you have your group of dudes, you have some ladies with you as well, and I think that you provide us such an awesome culture to have, but I think we also feed off of your energy. But it's also so different because Kenny, and Kenny's kind of like the cowboy Batman, right?
Kenny's like out of Yellowstone. He's like, we're gonna put him on a train.
yeah, exactly. We're gonna put it. Yeah. I feel like his if you had like Carissa as like the damsel in distress on the train tracks, right, waiting for the train, and he like horses himself in. That's exactly who Kenny is.
Kenny Miller. You got a hero complex.
Yeah, he's absolutely a hero. What I wanted to ask, because we have so many new people that ask such great questions, and I want to find like OGs that have questions, but the new folks have such great questions. And before we get into the questions, I wanted you to talk a little bit about I wanted to talk more about like Dr. Dave. Like, what are your credentials?
Sure.
Yeah, like on your resume, right?
Extensive credentials, Anthony. Many papers, many publishings, many mentorships, many mentorees.
Fair.
Yeah. For me, exercise was always kind of like a passion. Like I always loved it, but I also loved trying to understand it. So that I could do it better. And I don't know, everyone has different types of aptitude. For me, just that whole adaptation process just really clicked. And the first time I learned this was in biology class. And so we're learning about a guy named Hans Seal, who came up with something called the general adaptation syndrome, which is that, an organism tends to adapt to the stress you place upon it. And he mentioned stuff, he's talking about animals and different things like that. But then I started thinking about it in terms of like exercise, and while the examples we're getting are like, hey, if you're a pale guy and you go out in the sun, that's a stressor. So what happens? You get sunburn and it activates the melanin in your skin. You get darker, so you're more resistant to sunburn. And so just that whole concept, you can see how it plays into exercise and training and specifically like muscle growth, right? Like when you place a stress on your body that it's unaccustomed to, it will adapt to that stress. And depending on what the specific adaptation is, right? Whether you're trying to get faster, you're trying to get leaner, you're trying to get bigger, you're trying to be more explosive, you're trying to have more endurance, whatever it is, you can kind of line up really specific stressors that are probably going to match well with that desired outcome. And that's called the general adaptation syndrome, right? Or general adaptation syndrome. And this one that I'm speaking about now is called the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. So this was something that I think just honestly, everyone has an aptitude for different things. I just happen to have an aptitude for this. And I recognized it. And I was like, man, I'm pretty good at like creating these workouts. And I seem to just have a really good understanding of it. So I started pursuing education and exercise science. And at the university level, I wasn't an exercise science major. I was a marine and coastal science major. So I had all the background in nutritional sciences, but I was training to go in the Coast Guard or be a marine biologist, or I love geology too. So I was thinking I was going to do something in the earth sciences or something of that nature. But taking the courses in exercise science for me was like more for me to like understand how I can train better, because I like doing it. And then after college, I didn't go into the sciences. I started playing professional baseball, and that was kind of like, kind of took me, everyone has their own path, but I was just kind of following the signs the universe were giving me. It took me in a completely different direction. And I found myself, on buses for long periods of time, reading exercise science books and training myself. And in my career, I had a really devastating arm injury that required surgery and a year of being out. And that was when I started really going all into training and exercise physiology. And I took that year to study for what's called the NSCA CSCS, which is kind of the gold standard for becoming a certified strength and conditioning coach at the university level, at a professional level with any kind of professional sports teams, It's kind of like the one recognized standard. It's like, you want to be a strength coach, you have to have this. This is your license, really, to be a professional strength coach. And so it's a very big text you read for that. It's called The Essentials of Strength and Conditioning. And portion of it, I'd say about half of it is science, which is, you know, I already had a decent background in that. So that came fairly easy, just understanding the anatomy of muscle fibers and sliding filament theory, how muscles contract, or, you know, just some of the basic physiology associated with training. And the other half is like practical application, like how do you put a training program together, and how would you train a basketball player versus an endurance athlete versus a tennis player versus a baseball player versus someone trying to lose weight. So it kind of gives you kind of a broad overview of that, which I think that is the piece that came much more intuitive to me. And part of that is just experiencing it yourself. You know, I think knowledge comes in a lot of different ways, but like, you know, just knowing the information, like learning the information and being able to repeat the information isn't really knowledge. It's the practice and the application of it that actually builds real knowledge. You need those two things in conjunction with each other. So on one side, I'm reading these books, I'm learning the physiology. On the other side, I'm training myself. I'm being coached by these really great professional strength coaches. I'm even training some of my teammates and starting to get my feet wet on that end and just developing kind of a vernacular for it. And then I kind of hit a point in my career where I was like, you know, I think I've maybe had enough of playing minor league baseball. I think I'd like to try to carve out a more long-term sustainable career. And so I took the off season and did some mentorships, and I mentored at a bunch of different places. One of the places I had trained before is called the International Performance Institute. It's a part of IMG Academies. So IMG is a big sports representation company, and IMG Academies is where a lot of athletes get sent, specifically like tennis players, football players, baseball, basketball, and they'll go live at IMG Academies. And the strength and conditioning portion of IMG Academies is IPI, where they have some of the best minds in sport-specific training, exercise science. So I was there as an athlete, going through this stuff and learning from some really amazing coaches. You know, this place was founded by a guy named Lawrence Seagraves and Mark Verstegen, who went on to start big companies called Athletes Performance and Velocity Sports. So they kind of took that model and like franchised it. So a lot of these practices that they do there were kind of systemized and in place. And that's what I was learning when I was there. And then one of my personal coaches took me under his wing, and I mentored under him, and he was a PhD in exercise science. And I just remember him giving me books and being like, we're going to learn every single bone in the foot. And there's some ridiculous amount of bones in the foot. And I'm like, why do I need to learn this? And he's like, well, because the foot's the first point of contact on the ground, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I got like, I was kind of humbled because a lot of people just want to go and start training people. And my mentor was like, no. You need to know exactly what you're doing. Otherwise, you're a fake, you're a phony. And the fitness industry is full of these fakes and phonies. So if you're doing something, you're going to know what you're doing. You're going to know why you're going to do it. You're going to know how to apply it. You're going to know how to perform this movement and how to progress this movement. It's not going to be something like, oh, I saw this guy doing it and I'm trying to repeat it. And that to me set the context for the value system I have when it comes to training. It's like, you know, you can't just like try to create entertaining training. You really want to know it and understand it at a level that separates you as a coach. And that was what I took a lot of pride in. It's like just knowing the stuff and understanding at that level. So I passed my CSCS, I got that credential, and I started training people on my own. And I started a company called La Palestra, which is in New York City. And it was a really cool gym that was originally like, when I went into the gym, it was like, I didn't even think it was a gym. It was like just an unmarked building in Manhattan, but inside it was like the Skulls workout club, like, you know, all very private, very anonymous, all kinds of like celebrities and entertainers and, you know, people that couldn't train in normal gyms. And I was a trainer on staff there, and I would just spend honestly a lot of my day just like studying, because they have like a big training library. And I would be there studying, just waiting for people to come in, and then they book me as a trainer. And after a short while, you know, that didn't really last because my schedule was like really, really full. So I had to kind of like had a client that took me aside and said, hey, I would like to, you know, I would like to help you start your own business, and I'll be your first client, and I'll bring 3 clients. They're just like me, and you should be working for yourself. So that kind of put me on a trajectory of just like being Dave Lipson, the private trainer in Manhattan. In the course of that same time, I found CrossFit. And, I knew what I knew from sports specific training, which was very traditional strength and conditioning, really like university-based training, kind of what people call the science-based lifter stuff. Like I knew that stuff, but then I'm getting exposed to like CrossFit, which is like almost antithetical to that, right? A lot more basic, a lot more kind of what I was referencing in like general adaptation syndrome. Like, hey, we're stressing you in a way that you don't know, and changes are happening. Now, the downside is I don't think a lot of people in CrossFit knew why those changes were happening or what was exactly occurring, but they knew when they asked you to do thrusters and burpees harder and faster, that it was causing a litany of downstream effects in the body, including body composition, health, performance, endurance, stamina, blood sugar control, like all this kinds of stuff. So I don't think they really cared. But, me being the person I am, I always try to like organize stuff. And so, I started using the CrossFit within context for my clients is like, this is going to be our conditioning work today. And, just getting into CrossFit first as a competitor, I met some of the people at HQ in like 2008, and we had some great conversations about training and athletics, and they invited me to come, intern on their CrossFit HQ training staff. And so this was part of their like level 1 seminar team that would teach the what, why, and how of performing CrossFit, including, how to perform the movements, what fitness is, nutrition components, how to program, how to understand intensity, all in, again, a very systemized, user-friendly, by the numbers kind of way. And I worked on that staff for almost a decade teaching these courses and teaching them from the perspective of, yes, like, this is CrossFit, but I also kind of have this background outside of CrossFit that helps me understand and communicate the context of how you might use this regardless of what kind of athlete you're training, right? And I worked on that level 1 staff for a while. And then from there, I started working more what they call level 2 seminars, which is just kind of the art of coaching, like not how to coach an athlete, but how to coach the coaches. Like, what are the characteristics of good coaching? What do you need to really be a high level trainer, and understanding those characteristics and being able to develop them with coaches. And then, I during that same course of time, I like to read and I like to write. And a lot of what I wrote ended up in magazines and journals and things like that. So I had written for Men's Health Magazine, Shape Magazine, Muscle and Fitness, Train Magazine, so CrossFit magazines like The Box, but also for the CrossFit Journal, which is kind of like the educational index. And a lot of what I was writing about was the context of CrossFit within strength and conditioning, and how to understand the physiology that you're not taught in CrossFit, right? And some of these things and how you might kind of blend them in. I love doing that. But as I wrote and also went through my own career as a trainer, as an athlete, I started coming up with my own method, right? And my method was kind of a blend of those two worlds, like a blend of traditional strength and conditioning with a blend of this kind of like constantly varied program that has like a lot of benefits that are not scientific. Like, for instance, the community is a benefit. The fact that people are excited about the workouts and they're entertaining and fun is a benefit. The fact that it's measurable and you can track your fitness is a benefit. The fact that, like, it gives you a sense of identity where even though you're a general population athlete, you still feel like you're competing for something. Like, all of those are benefits that have nothing to do with like exercise science. And so I was thinking, well, how do we take these things and start to blend them with more concrete strength and conditioning, muscle hypertrophy principles? And so this is where, we started coming up with our own programs. Like, first it was Camille's CLB Nation program, or what we called the Athlete Development Program. And this program included things like plyometrics and a conjugate strength system and auxiliary hypertrophy work, alongside constantly varied functional movements executed at a high intensity, or what people call CrossFit. And so that was kind of like our first thing, kind of geared more towards the athlete, because that's how I was coaching Camille. Right? Because I'm like, hey, you're trying to be the world-class CrossFitter. It's going to take more than just doing your daily CrossFit workout to do that. Like, you're going to have to really be exceptional at these things. And so I tried to leverage my background in strength and conditioning, try to help her And that obviously panned out really well in 2014 when she won the world championship. But it was just kind of like a testimony to the efficacy of doing things with really good structure, along with just, the idea of like moving around and being functional and trying these movements. The other piece that I tried to kind of spill over was just like the exercise selection, because a lot of strength and conditioning that you'll see, sometimes it'll use like machines or, movements that are a bit more isolated. And for the layman who doesn't really work hard, for the average person in a gym, and I always use this example, if you go to 24-hour fitness, you're going to see two things. You're going to see people that are not working really hard, and you're going to see people that don't know how to move. All right. Because they don't practice deadlifts and back squats. And, or at least, back then it was kind of a rarity to just have somebody doing kettlebell or body weight movements or Olympic lifting in that traditional club gym. They're leaving a lot on the table because they don't have the ability to like really apply that fitness outside the gym. So bringing those movements into the program and maybe doing things like muscle hypertrophy, not necessarily on like the leg extension machine and the lat pull down, but on the pull-up bar and with the back squats and things like that. That had a lot of efficacy where you wouldn't just be like a display model only, but you could really use it outside the gym because you had great body awareness, because you had coordination and good range of motion and, balance and all those really effective traits. So yeah, I mean, those worlds just kind of collided, and that's how we ended up with our method. And in probably like the late 2010s, like 2016, 17, that's when, in our pursuit of like trying to become the fittest woman on earth for Camille, or the fittest guy that I could possibly be, we started like really breaking down, like we noticed like, oh, I've got shoulder injuries and back injuries. And like, there was just like every week it was getting worse. And there also wasn't that much progress happening. And we started to realize like, oh, wait a second. Like when we only train for performance, we really start to beat ourselves up and hit a point where we're plateauing, right? We're not getting any better. And out of necessity, we had to change our training, not because we wanted to necessarily, but there was no way for us to continue to do the things that were just hurting us repeatedly without just diminishing and getting to the point where we couldn't even like really move. It was like surgery after surgery and, PRP injections and back surgeries. And like, it's discouraging because you so badly want to progress, and you get discouraged because you think, oh, I'm getting older, this is just too much for me now, but we love the community and all the fun things about it, right? So after I had back surgery, I really thought long and hard about what I wanted my rest of my training career to look like. And I was thinking, man, like, I'm so lucky that I can fix this back and still move, whereas before you would have just been screwed. Like, we have the technology to fix you. You get stem cell injections and, drilling holes in your back. Like, it's great that you can breathe a new life and have the opportunity to get back to do something you love. But how are you going to honor that? Just by going back and doing what you're doing and getting the same result? Or are you going to change something? And so I was thinking like, oh man, like maybe I'll get into powerlifting or Olympic lifting, or CrossFit's just a little too intense. But all those things probably would lead to similar problems, right? Oh, yeah. Just beating up your body. And so the one thing I started thinking about was, hey, I've never really just done bodybuilding before. And I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, I've done bodybuilding because they've done like some hypertrophy work, or what they call hypertrophy work, or they've done 3 sets of 10, or a workout they got out of Muscle and Fitness magazine or something like that. But I had never really like tried to get to the point where I could like get on a stage. I never knew like the training principles and the intensification methods and the progression it would really take to change and transform your body into a highly muscular machine. And I had no idea about like the nutrition associated with that too. So I'm like, I've never really gotten into this. Like, this is an area of opportunity for me to learn, because I just kind of had a hunch that like maybe the answer is somewhere in there. Like maybe the answer is not in performance at all costs, but maybe it's this blend of like performance and aesthetics. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, aesthetics should be supportive of performance, even with basic ideas like elite athletes usually look like elite athletes. Right. Like you feel like, wow, this guy's a specimen. Like, no wonder he can do what he does. He looks insane, right? Like he has this amazing physiology. Or even just like what I understood about the adaptations in the body, how some of them are neurological. And honestly, in the sport specific realm, a lot of the training is neurological, like rate of force development and explosiveness and elastic tissue and that kind of stuff. But the hardware pieces, the biological pieces, are something that we like never really focused on, and just like increasing the size and strength of the machine to apply the software to. So that made sense to me that, like, adding muscle would increase your contractile potential. So if you're really efficient at getting the most out of your 200-pound body, imagine how much you can get out of your 225-pound body with better body composition. And then lastly, the orthopedic piece of it, which was like, the joints that we felt were deteriorating on us were like very common areas of breakdown. And those are things like knees, hips, back, shoulder, right? These are like very common things where you see a lot of people like, oh man, like it's just the wear and tear of performing these high-powered movements takes on those joints. But, hypertrophy by its nature is really rehabilitative, because it's all about building up tissue to fortify those areas. So from the standpoint of orthopedic safety and performance, and then lastly, the big one for me was like, I want to see how good I can look. Like, I'm trying to see how muscular I could be. Like, I would love to see what I can do. It checked all those boxes. So, I started just, this is at this point, I'm rehabbing back surgery. I'm just reading. I'm reading books. I'm buying textbooks. I'm buying books like The Science of Muscle Hypertrophy by Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, who's one of the foremost experts in the field. And as I'm reading that book, I'm like really getting inspired. I'm starting to figure out, like, how do I take this and apply it to CrossFit? Like, where can it integrate? And I'm learning about principles like heavy mechanical loading and muscle micro tearing and metabolic stress, and how these are all different avenues to be able to elicit muscle hypertrophy. And I reached out to Dr. Schoenfeld online thinking, well, he's probably not going to respond to me, but I'll just reach out. And sure enough, like, he got back to me, and we were able to have a series of conversations. And it was so beautiful and fruitful to be able to like explain to him, hey, I'm this athlete that has been, training CrossFit and trying to pursue elite athletic, expression for a really long time. And I'm trying to figure out, how can I incorporate that into CrossFit? Like, where is that going to fit? What would that look like? And then furthermore, because I was injured, I'm literally asking him the question straight up. Doctors say I can't lift heavy. How am I supposed to build muscle? Because that was my impression, was that if I was going to get results, it had to be really heavy and it had to be really hard. And I would have to just like grind through stuff and put more weight on the bar or try to do more reps. Right. And so as we broke it down, and we usually use his book as a reference, we came up with this principle of what is now our 90-day Get Huge program, our 8x8 system that uses like lightweight, short rest, and slow tempos to get muscle growth. And after surgery, I used that system to put on almost 30 pounds of lean tissue, because I lost so much being in bed for weeks and weeks and not being able to eat, not being able to train. So I was shocked at how well that worked, because I wasn't lifting heavy, I wasn't going fast, but somehow I'm putting on a lot of muscular size just by doing, moderate weights with good control and using short rest and getting a lot of volume in. And it was the same movements that, I would be really afraid to do with weight, like back squats and deadlifts and rack pulls. I'm like, well, I can't do that heavy, but, I can do it light, and with the right intensification methods, I can make that effective. So that's where I started. And then at a certain point there, I was like, I want to keep going. I want to try to do a bodybuilding show. So I went and I researched bodybuilding in my area out in Denver. And I found a gym called Armbrust Pro Gym, which is really a legendary gym. And they have just so much history producing professional bodybuilders, including the 7-time Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath. They got all these great coaches in there. I go in one day and I'm like, hey, I'm a CrossFitter and I want to do a bodybuilding show. And they laughed at me. And so I just kind of did my first show on my own. I came up with my own training. I was mostly doing like 8x8 stuff. I did my own diet. But I hired a guy in there to help me learn how to pose. And so, I got myself pretty good for that first show, for my first amateur show. I got myself into decent shape. It was probably one of the hardest things I'd ever done, because I never dieted that long and hard. And, I just really didn't know exactly what I was doing. So I just kind of maybe went a little too hard, thinking, I need to make this miserable for it to be effective. And I won that show. And after I won that show, I got up with the coach who was, my posing coach. And he's like, hey, do you want to do this for real? And little did I know that the guy I was talking to was like the best bodybuilding coach in the country. Like amazing bodybuilding coach, like so smart. And so I started training with him, and it really opened up my whole world into what was possible in training in terms of like how you put exercises together and how you create intensity. It really opened my mind up to that. And I started learning things about like drop sets and supersets and overload eccentrics and isometrics and cluster sets where you work and then you pause, and giant sets where you go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and all kinds of different tools. And what I did was I used my education with Brad as a method for organizing it, of understanding if I was going to use this stuff with like a CrossFit athlete, where would I put it? How would I put it together in a way that makes a lot of sense so that it's still supportive of like performance, but is also going to be really effective for bodybuilding? And that's what gave birth to what's now our Muscle Anarchy program. And that program has been going, I mean, geez, we're starting like 2017 with that, right? So
almost 10 years, yeah.
It's been almost like 8 years of this. And I mean, the people in the program, a lot of them have been with us for like, even like Kenny's been with us from the beginning, right? But like we have a lot of people who have been with us for so long because it really reinvented training for them, of like, how they can create intensity beyond just speed and load, how, it's not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it makes such a difference. And that relief of not worrying about how much weight's on the bar, but just focusing on the training effect that what you're doing has on the muscle, but consistently getting muscles to failure and doing it repeatedly and progressively over time, so that now, you're the guy in your 40s who's like beat up and not seeing results. Now all of a sudden your joints feel okay and your body's changing. And so like breathing that new life into people is such a passion of mine. And listen, I've like I said, like I write a lot about it. And part of that was as I started getting into bodybuilding and hypertrophy training, the CrossFit HQ was interested in having Camille and I do a course. And I was suggesting like, let's do a hypertrophy course, which they really weren't interested in, because there's this weird stigma between CrossFit and bodybuilding where they just like think it's stupid or something. And I said, no, I don't think you understand. Like, there's a lot of science involved in this. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of benefit on both sides. Bodybuilders need to be more functional. CrossFit athletes are leaving because they're hurt and they're not progressing. Like, this is really a great answer. And so I started writing about the method and just the science behind it. And it was going to be for the CrossFit Journal. And as I was writing, it got very long. It ended up being a paper that was almost 100 pages. And I was going to release it in pieces and sections. And I asked them before I gave it to them, like, hey, if I give you this to you, would you own it? And they said, yeah. And I go, well, I have to work too hard on it. So I'm just going to release it myself. And that was one of our first books, which was called the Hypertrophy for Functional Fitness. And that was basically like the theory of like, why and how would you integrate this with athletes who are training to forge elite fitness? And what are the benefits here? And how can you put this together? And then we complemented that with a program, with the 90-Day Get Huge program. And then for the athletes that wanted something a little bit more advanced, they have the Muscle Anarchy subscription, which is still to this day a live training program that every week is different. So, it captures that element of CrossFit where, because it's undulating, meaning it's not exactly the same every week. Like, the movements are alternating, the stimulus is alternating to a degree. It helps resist accommodation because you're not getting enough of the same stimulus to ever really fully adapt to it. However, like, you're getting so much exposure that it's building versatility, and over time, everything gets better. Kind of similar to like the whole mantra of CrossFit, but more focused on muscle hypertrophy. And that's kind of the whole method. So yeah, I mean, from an education standpoint, it's, the exercise science courses that I took as an undergrad, paired with like the mentorships I did at these different sports academies and with these different experts, paired with just like getting the credentials for the CSCS, and then working for CrossFit HQ, teaching the CrossFit methodology, and then finally coming up with my own methodology and writing and publishing about that, and then doing even seminars and stuff on that for other trainers. And you can see how those worlds, like, the theme that I always is, if you're going to talk about something, and this goes back to Seth teaching me about the bones in the foot, you don't want to be a bullshitter. Like, you want to have real knowledge. So I was very apprehensive to talk about hypertrophy training or bodybuilding until I felt like I had enough exposure and success in that space doing it with myself and finding that, like, look at, I could take myself from someone who's never bodybuilt to, being a national level bodybuilder for multiple years, using the methodology and still being able to, like, go and run 10Ks and jump into CrossFit workouts if I want to. And it doesn't have to specifically only be bodybuilding.
Yeah. Well, Dave, we are going to do a part 2 of this because it's going to segue into more stuff. But
oh
thank
shit,
you
we're
for
10
that.
minutes late. We're 10 minutes late on our
we're
program
good.
meeting.
Here, I'm gonna stop this. No,